What's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's LUMIX Live. We've got a lot of stuff to kind of talk about today. This particular week's stream is pretty much 100% derived from the questions that a lot of you have asked last week that we weren't really able to get to, so that you put down in the comments. So I want to thank everybody that put your questions in the comments after the video went live. It really does just help us, kind of really get into being able to format the following week's stream to make sure we address questions for you. So yeah, we're super excited about this. I've got my G9 Mark II hooked up, so we will be covering through, jumping into the camera's menu, showing you, walking you through some of the various different things here, and most importantly, answering a bunch of the questions. So to start with, if you are new to these streams, welcome. These are the weekly broadcasts that we do every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, for the most part. And yeah, they're all driven by what you want to learn about the cameras, what you want to hear and kind of see demonstrated. So throughout the entire broadcast, make sure to tag at LUMIX USA, as you can see many people are doing in the chat. It helps me go through and see the questions that you're asking so we can try to get to it. And yeah, we'll try to get through as many of them as we can today. I do have a bunch of stuff already lined up that were questions from last week, so I want to make sure we get through those as well. Before we go much further, I want to remind everybody about LUMIX Pro services. In the United States, we have the Red and Platinum tier. Red is the free membership, so if you've pre-ordered the G9 Mark II or you're getting ready to order the G9 Mark II, once that camera starts shipping, you will see our LPS site update so that you can actually start to register that on there. Red is free within our system, so that will get you extended, the added 3-year extended warranty, so that's over the base 1-year manufacturer. You get the member kit and all that kind of stuff, and you get a platform so that if you ever do have a service issue with the camera, you go right to there instead of the general consumer electronics repair service platform. If you're someone who likes to have a little bit better level of service, or you want to have more protection for the equipment that you're purchasing, you can always take a look at the Platinum tier as well. Our Platinum tier is a paid level service, but that gives you 2-day repairs with next day shipping both ways, 20% off out of warranty repairs, so if you drop or break a lens or a camera. You also get access to a membership hotline, so if you prefer to speak to someone in person, you have access to that during normal operating business hours. And then normal stuff, you get annual sensor cleanings, lens calibrations, and firmware updates done by our team if it's an endeavor you don't want to go through on your own. So I encourage you to take a look. In the US, we have the QR codes up on the screen so that you can go right to the page, or there is a link down in the description below. With that, let's see a couple of the questions that have come in first. I want to make sure we get to here. Let's see here. Any information about raw HDMI video, or about HDMI raw video? So on the G9 Mark II, there is no really no plan at this time, as far as I've understood, for raw over HDMI on this camera. If that is something you're looking for, it is going to be into the GH6 or into like an S5 Mark II or a Mark IIX. But stick with us. If things ever change, obviously we will update everyone on things like that. Ulrich says, is the sound like the GH6, and is the sound screen still available by assigning to a function button? That is actually a good question, and we will actually kind of talk a little bit about that. So audio-wise on the G9 Mark II, let me actually just fix this. There we go. So on the G9 Mark II, you do have a bunch of audio controls with this particular camera. So we do have the standard and low gain level adjustments here, as well as your standard audio level adjustments with the ability to go down and mute the output if you desire. And as far as the way the system works, it does offer the 4-channel recording when you're using the XLR1 adapter. So if you're used to working with cameras like the GH6 or the S5 Mark II or the S5 Mark IIX, you do have that control for audio levels the same way you do on the GH6. Now, this does also mean that it's 4 channels of audio, whether you're using 4 channels or not. We have heard your feedback, and it has been brought to the engineers. I don't know if there's going to be a change in that anytime soon, but just getting that out of the way for the time being. As far as can you assign the audio menu? So for those that don't know, if you want to assign something to one of our function buttons on the camera, you can just press and hold the button that you want to assign it. For the most part, as long as it's not one that's assigned to, like, say, scope, or AF scope, that's one that it is a push and hold feature. You'd have to go into the menu for that. But for the most part, you have the ability to do press and hold with it. And for that particular case, if you go into the audio settings here, you'll see that the audio information menu that we introduced on the GH6 can be used on these cameras. You just have to assign it to a function button if that's something that you want to use. So hopefully that helps, Ulrich. Let's see here. The 30 frames per second burst mode on the S5 Mark II has a start delay. Is this something that can be solved with a firmware update? Christian, I would encourage you to update the firmware on your S5 Mark II if you haven't already. There was an addition in the camera for the preview burst resolution. So when you would go into burst shooting, it would adjust, instead of doing a full-blown, full 24 megapixel resolution preview, it prefers speed over quality as far as just the preview goes. And that massively speeds up the burst from when you press the shutter to it starting the burst. So yeah, I would definitely encourage you to take a look at that. I know in my testing, it's made a pretty big difference there. Tom says, are the compatible external USB drives for the G9 Mark II the same for the S5 Mark II? Yeah, well, not the S5 Mark II, because the S5 Mark II does not support USB SSD, but it is the same for the Mark II X as well as the GH6. So our preferred ones, I know that Matt and I are, kind of really prioritizing, are the Condor Blue handle with the ProBlade SSDs. Those are probably our favorite ones that we've worked at, and they've been flawless with it. Otherwise, we did update that list. You can use the Samsung T7 Shield devices, the newer ones. The biggest thing with the Samsung T7s is that you have to, or T7 Shields, make that very clear. You have to make sure that you have updated the drive's firmware. So if you have one of those drives, make sure that you download the software that Samsung provides with it to make sure that you can update the firmware on the drive so that it works properly. That would be the kind of only caveat you'd have to think of. Otherwise, if you've got an old T5 drive up to 2 terabytes, they're going to work fine as well. Let's see here. In external teleconverter in digital zoom mode, is there a way to shoot 100 megapixels in either 2x or 4x? Noah, so no. When you're using the EX teleconverter or the digital zoom modes that are typically found in a lot of these cameras, you can't use the high resolution shot mode because it's using a smaller area of the sensor. The 100 megapixel shot mode, so handheld high resolution or tripod high resolution, those are going to be needed to be utilizing the full sensor area. So think of this as, if you're in the video side, open gate recording is the entire sensor region. Anything cropped in from that for either aspect ratio usage or faster readout speeds by using a smaller region on the higher end, on the full frame cameras, those aren't going to be able to give you it because there isn't the resolution there to do it with. So if you want to use 100 megapixel high res, you will have to do it from the full standard image. And then you would also just have to, at that point, if you want to crop in the 2x or 4x, just do it in post. It's basically the same thing that you'd be doing in camera, but you're going to get the full high res, and you'll get a higher resolution than you would if you didn't do high res for that. Let's see here. Is the G9 Mark II's punch-in magnifier sharp during recording like the S5 Mark II or soft like the GH6? I will actually have to double check that. I don't use manual focus that often anymore, actually, now that we've made the change over to PDAF. But we do still have the punch-in while manual focus with it, so I will have to do a little bit of check. I do see that Matt Fraser's in the chat, so maybe he can see for me if he's got a camera with him. But otherwise, yeah, we can check into that. There was one other question I wanted to jump to before I get into the topics for today. Where did that question go? Is the focus transition feature on the G9 Mark II? Yes. We do have focus transition in this camera as well. So if you go into the main video options here, thank you, Matt. If you go into your main video options here, you'll see focus transition. I'm in the photo mode with the camera, so it won't let me go into it, but it's the same transition function that we have in like GH6, S5 Mark II, Mark II-X, so on and so forth. So yeah, you have full featured video functions as well. Here, where were we? Let's see. Mercedes, was there an update in how it does in low light? I noticed a big improvement in the G9 Mark II with that. Yes, there was. This is actually one of the topics that I know Matt and I were going back and forth with to want to kind of check out and provide a little bit of information about on the way this sensor is working and the reasons why we chose this sensor for the G9 Mark II. If anyone hasn't already, there is a video that was posted by Richard Wong where he did shadow lift pulls on the G9 Mark II compared with its contemporaries in the market. It's about an hour and 3 minutes into his 2.5 hour-ish long video, or 2 hour long video. I encourage you to go take a look at this because my statements, obviously, this is coming from someone who works for the company. I've worked with the camera for a couple of months. I've had prior knowledge of this thing coming out. I've worked with it longer than most of the others out there. So I have my own opinions in the way that I've worked with it and seen my improvements. And it appears that, others are seeing that as well. But from an independent reviewer, it is showing that the G9 Mark II, with the changes and the hardware updates that we've made to this 25 megapixel sensor in this camera, while still being, as most people have, kind of picked up, there's differences between sensor types that you can buy. There's a few different acronyms and technologies that are used that, for whatever reason, some can say what they're using, some can't say what they're using, and that kind of thing with it. But for all intent and purpose, G9 Mark II's sensor is a state-of-the-art sensor using a lot of technologies that you would expect to see within modern sensors. So if you start saying like, how the wiring is set up on this sensor, well, the wiring is all set up on the backside of this sensor. So you've got everything on kind of out of the way of the light path. And that actually gives you a lot of big benefits. And it's something that I think a lot of people haven't really talked about. And we don't really talk about it because it's a sensor. There's a lot of other really cool things that we do on this sensor and why we picked it. But to start with, because this sensor is not a stacked sensor, we don't use stacked sensors, and I think we've talked about that before. This gives us an inherent ability over what other sensors are doing in just to achieve faster readout speeds. When you have to do something like that, you end up getting actually a problem where your low light performance is not as good because you have more stuff in the way. You have more problems with low light performance. And Richard's video in his post about the G9 Mark II, in his long post about it, he shows you the shadow lift. It's an undeniable, kind of result that you see there. The G9 Mark II, because we can get within what I would consider margin of error for readout speed, being able to do 60 frames per second, 75 frames per second in single focus, versus the arguably, with some lenses 50, but with the mass majority of them, it's only 25. We're able to get better low light performance than a sensor, and it's really just a matter of which you prefer. Do you want a cleaner looking image that has more dynamic range, or do you want something that's faster, but you are giving up your low light performance? You can't push those shadows as hard because you introduce a lot of noise there. So on the G9 Mark II, it is a big improvement in shadow performance. And it's because this sensor, I think someone just commented here, his technical question, do you suppose you could settle the sensor debate and share what, if any, are the sensor level hardware differences from the ones used on the GH6 besides PDAF points? So I can't give you hardware specifics. What I can tell you is that these are totally different sensors. They may share the same resolution, so the same density of pixels, but this sensor has been hardware reworked so that in those lower ranges, when you're in the 100 ISO up to around 800 ISO and then on, you are adding that benefit of dynamic range boost. And dynamic range boost is what allows us to get that much better low light performance because of a couple of things. One, DR boost is taking a single frame and processing it simultaneously. One for shadow detail, one for highlight detail, and saturation and noise levels, things like that. So I'm going to overly simplify this a little bit. So it takes those two and then it muxes them together into a single image at the pixel level. So it's not like an HDR that you would think of if you were taking multiple images, throwing them together, that kind of thing. It is that you are getting per pixel adjustments of what that value should be. This means that the G9 Mark II sensor is able to produce much more information in the shadows. You're able to get much cleaner detail in the shadows. And when we say more information, we mean that it's not going to be where your shadow information becomes so noisy that you can't find detail there. We can pull more detail out because inherently we are not recording as much noise as other sensors, especially as things like stacked sensors. And outside of that, it's current technology that's being used in this sensor that you would find in many others. But ultimately, one thing that I do want to caveat Richard's testing with is that there are no Adobe Camera Raw support options yet for the G9 Mark II. The conclusion drawn there was with a maybe not necessarily optimized raw debayering that you would see done when a company properly releases the raw update. That's not saying that it's a bad test, but basically tricking the software into thinking that it's a GH6, because same sensor resolution, means that is a good start point. And when the programs are optimized for what the sensors are actually doing, that's where you get the final result. And as it sits already, we don't have the purple cast that you have in the shadows when you have to pull information up. We don't have the increased in chroma noise, in luminance noise. It makes the thing that much more useful for things like concert, event photography, travel photography, higher dynamic range scenarios. And it is a massive change. I don't think I can hammer home as much as I can that this is not the sensor from the GH6 and it's not a minor software change. It's not a minor little thing. It's not that it's a different single letter in a sensor, product code thing that I've seen a bunch of people throw around online. The truth is, and I've said this before, if you see these kinds of things going around on various forum sites, it's written and explained by people who don't actually know what they're talking about. That's why we do these streams. That's why we are here, to try to get you as much information as we possibly can, while also working within the bounds that I can't tell you everything about hardware. So, long-winded way to say yes, this camera is a hell of a lot better in low light than the previous G9 and its direct counterpart that the world wants to compare it to. So I encourage you to go take a look at the various different reviews out there, and those that have had hands-on with the camera instead of listening to people who are speculating online and have never even touched any of these cameras. So, that being said, let's see here. Could you deliver an in-depth explanation on how DR boost... So hopefully that was a good explanation for you there. Why no sensor shield? I assume you mean when the shutter closes. Currently to date, there's still a lot out on whether or not that's actually a better method of doing this. One thing that I will say that actually does not get much coverage at all on the G9 Mark II is that the G9 Mark II does add a new sensor cleaning functionality. Where is it? Nope, that's pixel refresh, sensor cleaning. So the sensor cleaning in the G9 Mark II, which is something that from a function is different than what the previous cameras did. When you do sensor cleaning now, it actually is vibrating the stabilization carriage on this versus the other ones where it's maybe less noticeable what it's doing. So as far as sensor cleaning goes, there have been improvements on this camera as well. So, Let's see here. Technical question, but do you suppose you could settle the... Okay, wait. Oh, I jumped back up in questions here. Sorry. Bob says, G9 Mark II has no fan with... will firmware or for final production be tuned to ensure the overheating is minimal and use of an SSD drive is going to greatly reduce risk of overheating? So firmware can only do so much as far as thermals go. Optimizations in the engine, optimizations in the sensor, in the encoding, all that kind of stuff. That is what controls things like how long you can record. It was an intentional decision to not include an active cooling solution in this camera because this is a camera designed from a photographer's perspective first. If you are doing 90%, 80% video first, the camera's going to be okay for you, but it is going to be a little more environmentally dependent on how you shoot. Does SSD external recording reduce the risk of overheating? To a point. It's a bit of a trade-off because while yes, you are sending the footage and not recording to internal storage, the G9 Mark II uses SD cards, which don't heat up like CF Express cards go, so you're not adding another heat-generating component in the camera from that perspective. If anything, external SSD recording, you're actually potentially adding some heat into the system still, because you have to run the USB bus to power the drive and send footage out of it. But the truth is that, again, if you need an unlimited recording camera or you are recording in really, kind of challenging thermal environments, a GH6, an S5 Mark II, or an S5 Mark IIX are going to do better for you because those are actively cooled cameras. With this one, I can say in my studio, which I keep at about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, which I think is like around 26 degrees Celsius. I think my conversion's horrible. I know Matt's probably going to correct me in the chat there with that. In 70 degrees Fahrenheit, I can record 4K 24 without any problem. I can fill a card, I can kill batteries, it's fine. 4K 120, as you've seen with others, the other independent reviewers, and I encourage you to go take a look at like Chris and Jordan's video about that. 4K 120, can you get it to give you the warnings and kind of stop recording within a 70 degree environment? Yeah, but are you really going to be recording 2 hours of 120 frames per second? Are you going to be doing 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, in which case you're perfectly fine. You're not going to run into a problem. Now, here in Austin, it has been for the last couple of months, as many know in the South, we've been really, really hot. When I say really hot, we have been over 40 Cs, over 104 degrees Fahrenheit on almost a daily basis for a number of months there. And when I take the camera outside and would go film, segments for training videos, things like that, I never had a problem with this camera giving me any kind of thermal issue. And that's because I'm not doing long takes. I'm not doing more than, say, a 5-minute clip, a 10-minute clip at most. And then I'm stopping and I'm resetting and I'm kind of working on stuff there. It handles that kind of shooting perfectly fine. If I were to need to be doing, an hour and a half long take to camera for, say, a launch of a product, I'm going to use my S5 Mark II, my Mark IIX, or my GH6 for that because I know I can just click record, let it run. I don't have to stop recording between takes. I can just let it go and then bring it into post later and just chop up the video for how I want it. So just keep that in mind. Again, camera's designed from a photographer's perspective. It's designed because one of the biggest things we got feedback with was that the vast majority of photographers don't want vents on their camera. They want cameras designed first and foremost from a photographer's point of view. And that means that adding vents, active cooling, a lot of that stuff, which is critical for professional video use, isn't necessarily as needed here. So, I encourage you, once they start getting into the stores, once reps start going around, go get some hands-on with it, start playing around with it. Most stores are going to be in a relatively common temperature environment to play around with. And think for yourself with this. Actually try to do some hands-on with it if you have the opportunity to. Hi from London. I'm thinking of trading in some lenses, used gear for an S5 IIX at near zero cost for landscapes and portraiture, then upgrading my G9 to a G9 Mark II for sports and wildlife. That is awesome. Very cool. I think it's Martin. Very cool. Love to hear that stuff. Yannick says, does the 50-200 f2.8 to f4 need an update to work with the G9 Mark II? Not technically. Out of the box, it's going to work perfectly fine as far as focus speed and performance. There may be a firmware update that comes for a lens like that a little bit down the line that will add in the support for continuous focus while zooming. As of today, the new 1-400, the 12 to 60 millimeter, and the old 1-400, I believe, are the three lenses that out of the box are compatible with the focus while zooming. Others just need a firmware update to tweak that, since that's not a part of feature that was available on the DFD system, the sole DFD system. But yeah, if you put that lens right on your camera, I've done it. It's gonna work it's gonna work beautifully, unless you need to zoom and focus at the same time, in which case just keep an eye out for firmware updates, and you know that we'll talk about them here on the stream as soon as they come across. Let's see here. Does G9 Mark II have shutter angle? Yes, it does. Where did we go? Eric says, I've seen most of the initial reviews of the G9 Mark II, I think. But do you know of any specific wildlife photographers besides Dwayne Patton who have used and tested the camera? Cheers. Yeah, so Jeremy also had the G9 Mark II in hand, if you're looking for English speaking. Jeremy Knapp has also had his hands on with the camera and the 100-400. It's Jeremy, N-E-I-P-P. I would definitely encourage you to go take a look at his video. He's someone who jumps back and forth with primarily in full frame cameras, and we sent the camera to him to, you know, get his opinion and check out of it as well. From the Reddit mega thread, does flash work in focus bracketing? That is actually going to be, let's talk about that. So I've seen a number of comments, and this is one of the things that got brought up in the comments section from last week's video, and that was focus bracketing within the LUMIX cameras. Up until recently, if you wanted to do focus bracketing, you need to basically set the camera up, and if you wanted to do flash with it, it would only fire on the first shot unless you were using very specific LUMIX flashes. And let's be honest, not many people actually have our flashes. A lot of people, like myself, I use the Godox flashes. I, of course, have all of our flashes as well, and they're nothing wrong with them. I've just always had the Godox flashes for my particular shooting. And the thing that would happen there is that those flashes would only fire once on the first shot, and then it would run the rest of the burst and for bracketing, and you wouldn't have flash with it. Well, I am very happy to say on the G9 Mark II, you do have the ability to do focus bracketing. So if you go into the menus here, you go down into your other options for photo 1, bracketing, and if I turn this off of the burst mode here, you go into bracketing and you can select focus. From here, you can go into more settings, and this is where you can change how coarse or fine you want the steps to be on a scale of 1 to 10. So if I select 4, you can do up to 999 images in a single bracket. And what this basically means is that it's going to take the focus range that the lens is that you have attached to it, divide that 999 times with the step aggregate that you've selected there, and then you can select whether you want it to start from 0 and then just go out, or you want it to start 0, go negative, and then positive afterwards. It's really just a matter of how you like to organize your photos. Well, once you have that set up, the biggest difference with this camera is that I can use this Godox flash. I can put it on there, and it will fire for each of the exposures that are taken for the focus bracketing. So at that point, it is really just going to depend on, one, how good of a battery do you have in your flash, what power rate you have, which will just determine how long you can fire the flash for before it takes, you know, delays for recharging. But the way our system has been set up is you don't have to program in any kind of delay or anything like that. The camera is communicating with the flash, so it will not fire the next frame in the bracket until the flash is ready. So if you're doing, say, a ton of shots and you've got it at 1-to-1 power, Depending on the flash you're using, that could cause some delay because 1-to-1 power is a pretty heavy request for a lot of these kinds of flashes. But I have tested 20 shot. I've been waiting for my battery to recharge in this because I've been commenting on the Facebook groups with this. But at 1/64th power, 20 shots right through. When I force it in a manual and I force it to do a 1/5 of a second exposure to give more time between each of those images, the next frame fires when the flash is ready to trigger, so it'll base off the shutter speed when the flash is ready to trigger and then go on. Yeah, there's nothing else that you have to do with it. It just up and works and you're good to go. So not a huge difference. I think that will impact a ton of people within looking in the photography world. But the reality is that this is something that we've gotten a lot of feedback on about wanting to be able to use burst flash photography. And the G9 Mark II is a first camera. We've opened it up and worked on the software to be able to allow third-party flashes to do this now. So big update. Very excited about this. Lots of cool things coming with the new camera. Let's see here. Whoa, thank you, Google, or thank you, YouTube chat. Why is it not possible to record 60p open gate? Original G9 was able to, although without sound. This is #1 feature I missed on the GH6. 30 FPS is not enough. Open gate, 4.4K has a crop. So the original G9 did not do necessarily. For one, it was straight JPEG. It was not a video stream. It was a hard 60 frames per second. It wasn't 5994. It was in a very low bit rate, 420 10-bit, by comparison to what this system's designed for now. The other thing to think about is the sensor's higher resolution. When you look at the G9, it was 20 megapixel. So 6K wasn't 5700 pixels by 43 something for the vertical. There was a resolution change between these two cameras. So while, yes, you were able to do some stuff on the other cameras, the newer cameras with higher resolution and a little bit faster performance, you do start to run into some of those, kind of points where as you start to go with faster processing, with more being done for image quality to make sure that, especially with this, with the DR boost functionality, certain things just aren't always going to be possible given the overall hardware overhead there. This sensor, if you are doing things like 4K 120, which is from a 16:9 region or a 17:9 region, that is sampling from the full resolution of the width. Your height is where your restrictions come from for readout speed. So on this camera, if you want to record in full-blown open gate, 30p is where you got. You go down past that is where you can get into 60p when you start reducing some of that vertical height on the sensor. I hear you though, but we do have to work in a little bit of reality with hardware in some cases. Any idea as to when G9 Mark II will be shipping? I have yours on pre-order. Doug, so these will be beginning to ship in the first couple weeks of November. So you will have them right around that time, as long as there's no, horrible global shipping problem like we've seemed to almost every couple of months run into. So, yeah, we should see them shipping beginning of November here. Let's see here. Where do you go? Sean, do you know if the LUMIX loan program that they run in the UK is coming to other countries as well, like the Netherlands? I do not know. Honestly, I don't have much information about what the UK and EU do for their loaner programs. It's not something that they share necessarily with me. But I can always ask and see. But it just, I don't really know if it's going to come to the Netherlands. I would recommend reaching out to the social teams on LUMIX within your region. I know, at least here in the US, we have a very active social team. I can't really speak to the speed that you'd get from some of the other regions. Sorry, Red Frame. Let's see here. we're wrong here. I was using, let me see here. Thank you. I have POV, in-camera focus stacking would be a lot more interesting. Also, a lot more challenging and patient images. Just checking to see here. Where did we go with that kind of question? Sorry, I see a couple comments going on here. If you want me to respond to something, please make sure to just tag at LUMIX USA. But yes, Flash does work in focus bracketing. I have tested it, and it does work fine. Love my G9, even if you're going to S5 to really have LUMIX. Where did we go? Hey, there we go. Does it still take the G9 batteries? I've gotten mixed answers on this. No, unfortunately, it does not take the original G9 batteries. This was a change that had to be made because of voltage. When you look at the BLF-19 versus the BLK-22s, BLK-22s have just they're better batteries. They have more options. They're 2,800 milliamp hour. And the sizing is a little different in them because of the cell changes that are used. So, unfortunately, on this platform, the old BLF-19s are not compatible. Yeah, sorry. Let's see here. I know the stream is focused around the G9 Mark II, but is there a way to set up S5 2X as a webcam to be used through software like OBS? Yes, you would need something like this. You would need something like an external capture card. Our cameras do not at this moment. This is something Matt and I have been asking for a lot in these cameras. We don't have UVC for USB support on the cameras, but the more you let us know that that's stuff that you want to see, the more likely we are to kind of help work with the engineers to try to deploy it. So best option for best quality, get a capture card. They're relatively inexpensive these days, and you'd be able to feed it in right to OBS. That's how I have my stuff streamed up. USB video is cool and all, but only recently is it starting to get to where it's actually kind of usable with most cameras. Is 4K 120 pixel-to-pixel ProRes RAW going to be available via HDMI? At this current moment, G9 Mark II has no plans for RAW over HDMI. Should things change, you know that we'll talk about it here first. The Technopilot. Sean, can you please expand more on internal LUT processing in the GH6, S5 Mark II, and G9 Mark II? Well, I understand they support 33-point LUTs. I have heard that they might be tossing out data down to 17-point, and we can actually get better performance color smoothness using 17-point cubes. So the camera can take up to 33 points. The big difference here that I think gets confusing across the board is how those LUTs are generated. If you're generating those LUTs for Vlog vgamut, you load the 33 point in and you should be perfectly fine. I would have to double check with Matt Fraser on as far as if there's a reason why 17 point would be better in the camera. To my knowledge, 33 point is what the camera's looking for, which is why if you load a 65 point, camera can't find them. The other thing to remember is it depends on, are you using the internal LUTs for photo or video use? Photo and video use are going to be giving you very different platforms that you need to base your LUTs off of. If you create a LUT in Vlog and vgamut and then you want to go shoot stills with it, you have to remember that one, your stills are going to be Vlog vgamut, but stills being captured that way are in 14-bit raw photo depth. If is what the base starts at. Video-wise, it's going to be like loading a LUT on 420 10-bit, 422 10-bit, whatever it is that you've got the camera set up for. If you want to be loading a LUT over, say, like standard, vivid, natural, one of the other new profiles that are in the camera, this is where you have to generate your LUTs a little differently. You want to make sure that they're based in sRGB, not in Vlog vgamut, so it's a little bit of a change in how you create them. I did a stream a number of weeks ago about how to create LUTs for photographic use, so I encourage you to go take a look at that because that will explain and show you how to create them for photography. if you take a mismatched LUT, one for Vlog V Gamut, and apply it on a standard photo image, you can get some weird artifacts with it because the color spaces aren't designed to match each other. Same if you generate a LUT, say, in Adobe RGB versus sRGB versus P3, and then you try to load it into the camera, that's where you can run into some of these other problems. So you want to make sure that if you are loading a LUT in for photography, make sure that, one, if you have your camera set to sRGB, that your LUT is designed for sRGB. If you're outputting in Adobe RGB, make sure that you're setting it up for Adobe RGB, and honestly do tests one way, for yourself. Make sure that it looks the way you want it to look and intend it to look. And then if you're doing Vlog V Gamut, use the real-time LUT color profile that's named in the camera for video. If you are a still shooter, I cannot recommend using the real-time LUT named color profile, because that is only locked into Vlog V Gamut, and your raw files, you'll wreak havoc on your raw files. So hopefully that helps a little bit, but I haven't heard anything that it drops down to 17 point as far as camera goes. I could be totally wrong. That's why I would love if Matt can check for me. But yeah, we will check on that for you. Let's see here. Thank you. Can I suggest a setting that would allow the function buttons to have two settings? One setting for photo mode and the other for video, like how Q menu changes. It's actually a good recommendation, Tim. We will definitely get that passed over to the team. Hey, Sean, is live crop feature available with the G9 Mark II? So live cropping, let me turn this into the video mode so I can actually use all the video functions on this camera. So live cropping, I honestly cannot remember if it is in this camera. We got into the video menu here. We're coming down. Filter settings. Live crop actually might not be in this one. You may have to go to a GH6 for that. Yeah, we have focus transition. Do not believe we have live crop in this camera. No. So, yeah, if you need live crop, you would need to go to a GH6 or an S5 Mark II or Mark IIX. Can 1440p be added to a recording option on the GH6 G9 Mark II? I mean, we can ask. I don't really know if you would see it. 1440p, I understand the reasons for 1440p, but I don't know if you would see that get deployed in modern cameras. Kudo says, not sure if you answered, so apologies, but is DR boost on the G9 Mark II up to 60 FPS like the GH6? Yes. So 60 frames per second in video and slower, you'll be using dynamic range boost. The difference is on this camera, it runs the whole ISO range in the standard color profiles. If you're in video color profiles like Vlog, that will start at 500 and go up. But it's always on. It's not a toggleable option like it was on the GH6. And it goes up to and includes 60 frames per second. Anything over that, the system goes to a single process circuit. Floyd says, what is the alternative to 4K, 6K photo feature that was in the G9? So with this camera, we've kind of stopped putting 4K, 6K photo features into basically all of our cameras. Part of the reason is that with the G9 Mark II, if you wanted to use the, say, 4K photo and you wanted to use, say, pre for 4K photo, that is a feature that, I think a lot of people really liked because it gave you that ability to have, half a second to a second before you press the shutter being stored in a buffer so that when you press the shutter, it stores out the rest of the images. Cool feature. On the newer cameras, especially on the G9 Mark II, we now have the ability to actually not have to use the 4K photo function, which was a video file that was being recorded in, hard frame rates, so 60 frames per second, 30 frames per second. So now, with the way this works, if I go into burst shooting, you'll see that I have the options here for a couple different things. You have SH, which is super high. This would be electronic shutter at 75 frames per second, 60 frames per second, and 20 frames per second. This would be very equivalent at the 60 frames per second to what we were able to do in 4K and 6K photo options, which again, those are video files designed to be able to pull and extract a still out of later, which meant you only got a JPEG out of them. On the G9 Mark II, these are raw and JPEG images. So that means that you are getting full-blown access to the raw file without worrying about bit depth drops, without worrying about, you know, am I losing flexibility in this image compared to a standard single shot or mechanical shutter. But what we have added as well is the pre-options for this, which we had on the original G9. So now we have an SH60 pre, which when you select, you'll see that we now have control over the pre-recording buffer. So this is where I can say I want 30 frames before I press the shutter, 60 frames before I press the shutter, or 90 frames before I press the shutter. This is, in essence, the same thing we did with 4K, 6K photo, as far as the burst rates are related to. And then obviously, if you change this to SH20, again, it's you want 10, 20, or 30 frames before you press the shutter. 60 frames per second is going to get you about 3.3 seconds worth of the buffer being inundated with stills. Takes around a minute to clear if you're using good V90 cards. If you just do that 60, stop doing everything and just let the camera go. But I do want to make one thing clear. Our system, while the buffer is being cleared to your card, you can still continue to do burst shooting until you fill the buffer up again. So if you do a 60 frames per second burst, fill the buffer up, the camera will stop. You have to press the shutter again as the buffer is being cleared out, but it'll fill the buffer back up with what's remaining and what has been cleared out to the card. If you're doing this in 20 frames per second, you get closer to like 10-ish seconds of recording. So you're able to get more shots in, especially as you start going, to extend how long you want to shoot. The difference here is that if I'm wholeheartedly just holding my finger down on the SH button options here, and I hit the buffer, I have to lift my finger back up and press the shutter again. If I'm in mechanical, I can just press and hold the button down and keep going. When it hits the buffer, it will slow down. It will slow the burst rate down. So that's a little bit of a difference in the way this system goes. But yeah, it's so far I can tell you in the times I've been out there photographing the motorcycles with this camera, I've never run into a problem where the buffer slowed me down. Having that 200 frames per second is awesome, especially because you do have the option to go into the menu and tell the camera that you want to be able to preview images while you are waiting for buffer to clear. I forget where that is in the menu. Matt and I actually had a whole conversation about this as far as like what the priority is for how you want to be able to review images. So if we go into here, you'll see that you have a couple different changes here in the playback menu. One of the main ones, magnify from AF point. Highly recommend you turn that on if you're using the AF system on the camera. Behavior after video playback. I will have to dig through and find where that option was in the menu because I can't remember where it is. There are a lot of things in this camera menu, and I try to remember where they all are. Can't always get to remember every little thing there. Bob says, does the G9 Mark II accept timecode via flash sync port? No, because there is no flash sync port. If you need a camera with flash sync support for timecode injection or jamming timecode, you have to go to a GH6 or an S1H. Cameras like that. The original G9 did not accept timecode over sync port either. Those are GH series features. Let's see here. Any LUMIX for entry-level cameras released this year, like an upgrade to the G7 Mark II or a G95 Mark II? Want to buy entry-level one, but I hope it could be a LUMIX. We don't have any commentary on potential future cameras, whether we are going to go down that route or we're not. If you've been around on the streams before, we get those questions a lot, and while I can't answer them for you, you asking them helps us bring light to engineers and planning teams as to what it is that y'all are asking us to be making. So sorry I can't give you a clear answer on that. but it helps that you ask us those questions because, believe me, we can take it, and I'm happy to be able to just say, like, hey, I can't answer it, but, you know, we still pass it on to the teams there. Let's see here. Martin, how about virtual Bluetooth function buttons that can be mapped? Would be super useful. That would be an interesting thing to see. I don't know of anyone that does, in camera-wise, that would do Bluetooth external function buttons. But that's a very clever idea, Martin. We will definitely make sure that the engineers see that one. Let's see here. Any possibility of including HEIF? 8-bit JPEG is a bit limited, especially with how good real-time LUT feature is. I don't know if HEIF is something that we'll see in our cameras anytime soon. We hear you about it. I know Matt and I would like to see it. Sorry, Matt, I'm speaking on your behalf here. But as far as 8-bit JPEGs and real-time LUT, you have to remember that the real-time LUT functionality is being processed off of the full-blown RAW file that's being created in the camera, and then a JPEG is being created from that. That means that you're not just applying the LUT over an 8-bit JPEG and then having to deal with 8-bit data. You are still working with the higher res or higher quality file that's then being created into a JPEG in camera. So I wouldn't worry too much about issues there. It's more about making sure that that LUT is properly designed for the color space that you're working in. If it's sRGB, Adobe RGB, or Vlog vGamut. That's where I think you run into a little more issues than you would with the bit depths of the final JPEG image. Plus the fact that the vast majority of outlets are still primarily JPEG as the requirement. HEIF is getting there. I don't want to discourage HEIF. Both of my phones can shoot in it. But it does cause a bit of a nightmare when you're trying to send files to platforms that don't know what to do with an HEIF file. But yeah, let's see here. I watched a couple of great videos from Adventure and Art. Oh, okay, that was a response for one of the others. Will the camera automatically connect to an iPhone for GPS data information, or does the connection have to be made in the app every time? So this is actually a good point. So a couple weeks ago, I did the stream about the LUMIX Sync app. That is the new app that we use for the current cameras that we've released over the last couple of years. The first thing I recommend you do with your LUMIX camera, if you want to work with your iPhone or Android device, connect them over Bluetooth first. The camera or the app, if you've never used the app before, it's going to give you a walkthrough on how to link up the Bluetooth between the camera. If not, go take a look at the video that I did a couple weeks ago about the Sync app, and I do a walkthrough of it. Bluetooth is how we do the geolocation on the cameras. I hear the comments from people that want us to put GPS functionality right in the camera, but I think what most people forget is the battery consumption problem. GPS in cameras chews up battery if you forget to turn it off. Bluetooth does not. So it's a balance. You got to keep those both in mind. An external dongle can be lost, broken, quality has to be, kind of altered there. Most people always have their phone with them, so yeah. Anyway, once you do that, you go into the camera's menu here. Once you've linked the Bluetooth the first time, and it's under the settings menu, which would be the smart way to go. You go into the settings menu under Bluetooth, and you just turn location logging on. When you turn the camera on, you will get the Bluetooth icon and a GPS icon. Just make sure your phone is near the camera. And typically what I do is I make sure that I open the app, see that the connection's there, and then just minimize it and let it run in the background. The issue you may run into with the iPhones is background app permissions. You have to make sure on iOS that you are allowing the app to run in the background, or iOS will put the app to sleep, which will disconnect them. Android, starting to have some of those problems as they start to like kind of manage what can be run in the background. But it is less on the Android devices because you've already validated that this is something you want to have attached to it. So just kind of keep that in mind with what you're looking at there. Let's see here. Asking for the possibility of a G9 Mark II. Love the G9 Mark II. Has LUMIX style font and on-off switch, but the G90 in a smaller body and older G lenses design would be amazing. We've definitely heard the commentary about a smaller camera. Can't confirm, deny, or say yes or no or anything like that about whether or not there's other cameras coming this year. So, yep, sorry. JC, how's it going? It's going great. How are you? What is the G9 Mark II native ISO when using Leica monochrome setting? What are the exposure or any limitations when using monotones? So, this is one of the last things actually that I have, because ironically, a lot of the questions he asked were the things that I had prepped already from last week's stream. So, someone had actually asked about the various color profiles, and I think this is a good way to kind of cover both with one topic here. So, in the G9 Mark II, we introduced a new color profile here. We introduced the Leica monochrome color profile. So for those that aren't aware of our profiles, we have standard, vivid, natural, L Classic Neo, which is like a very 70s style kind of, I'd say more like pale palette colors. Flat, which is designed to be flat. Landscape, portrait, and then we go into our black and whites. We have a just simple, straightforward monochrome. We have L monochrome, which is more contrasty. Let me actually turn this light on so that we can get a little bit better preview of these colors here. So we have monochrome, which you see is not as contrasty. Shadows are lifted a bit. L monochrome, which is more contrasty. Your shadows are a bit darker. L monochrome D, which is keeping even harsher contrast. So your highlights are going to get brighter. Shadows are going to get a little bit darker. Your midtones are kept on the lower end of the spectrum. L monochrome S, which is kind of a softer monochrome. So everything's kind of boosted up a little bit. You get kind of more of a glowy look to the black and white. And then now the new one, Leica monochrome. So Leica monochrome is a monochrome that is developed under the L Squared technology partnership that we have with Leica. This is the first kind of convergence that we're seeing from that partnership when it comes to being deployed in cameras. And a Micro Four Thirds camera is the first one to have it deployed in here. This is a profile developed and designed by Leica for the camera. Depending on who you'd ask, L monochrome in the other, in all the other cameras is basically just, it takes on various different monochrome profiles. So various different ways that you would want to create a black and white image. When it comes to working in any of these profiles, for photo or for video, the important thing to know is that these images, you are able to use all the way down to ISO 100, and then you can load on extended ISO and bring that down to ISO 50 if you wanted to. Typically, I'm shooting at 100 ISO. I rarely ever go down into the extended ranges because you're giving up something when you do that in any camera. But yeah, photo and video, it's going to function like any other standard image that you want to capture. You don't really have to think too much about it. If you were shooting in video, which if I go in, set this to video, I can come in here and I can change my color profiles just like I did before. I can change it to L monochrome, and you'll see here I've got my ISO is down. I can go to 100 ISO. I've got f1.2, 180 degree shutter angle because I'm shooting on the Nocticron, and I've had the camera set up for 4K 30p. No, full HD 30p actually, for what I was doing here. But yeah, it gives you all of the functionality, all of the ISO ranges that you want. You don't have to worry about what your native base ISO is because it's working in a standard color profile. It's not working in V-Log or V-Gamut. If you switch the camera over into V-Log, V-Gamut, that is where you will see the the base ISO value change to where you can go to 500. That is where your base native numbers are going to be there for that. So yeah, hopefully that helps, JC. And let's put this back in monochrome. I really like the monochrome color profile. Let's see here. I got time for a couple more questions, and then we will actually have to call it already. This has been a very fast hour. Are there any plans to bring out the f1.7 zoom line? Unfortunately, we don't comment on future product development. Urban says, is it possible to provide anamorphic desqueeze monitor display in the photo mode as it is for video? I would love for that to happen. The more of you let us know that that's something you want to see in the comments after this video goes live, the better ability Matt and I have to convince people to do that. I see a huge value in it, especially knowing that anamorphic lenses are becoming a lot more affordable, and it's another stylistic choice, especially in the photo side. But if you let us know in the comment after this video, post that you want to see that, the anamorphic desqueeze mode in photo, that'll just help us get that conversation out more to the teams that need it. Tom says, I would also like to see a smaller form factor. Yep, we've heard a lot of that. Does the G9 Mark II have some new in-camera raw processing features? I imagine a few people love this. People use this feature, but I love it. Yeah, the camera does have in-camera processing. So if I go in here, say we look at this image. For those that have never worked with our cameras before, we do have in-camera raw processing. Am I actually looking at a raw file there, or am I still on JPEG? Display. That would be a JPEG image, so let me go to card slot 1, because I have my stuff segmented out there. So raw file, let's take a look at this image. Is this because I'm attached to HDMI? This might be because I'm attached to HDMI. Let me double check something here. Some features you can't be attached to HDMI for, so let's see here. We've got raw image there. All right. Did this come up? Okay, so raw processing, I can't show you over HDMI with this, so I would have to set up there. But yes, raw processing within our camera has been updated a little bit. You do have the ability to apply the LUT to your photo after you've taken it. You can change the color profile that the file was shot in after you've taken it. So that does give you a lot of flexibility in post. If you are working with the camera and you can't wait for raw processing software to be downloaded on it by the time the camera comes out, which I'm hoping it's ready to go from the main raw processors by the time we release the camera publicly, you can do raw processing internally. There is a program, SilkyPix, that you can get with the camera. It's in the user's manual when you get the camera. It's like QR code right on the front of the little quick start guide. That program's okay. It's not my favorite out there, but it does work on this one. Let's see here. Where did we go? Sean says, Sean, I feel pretty sure you're pushing for it already, but just a little encouragement, if so, to continue asking engineers to make grain option available in all profiles. Yes, that definitely is something that I would like to see. Max, I do not agree with you one bit at all. I do not think this camera is bulky at all for street, and I do not believe it is a robbery magnet. I think I've traveled all over with our cameras slung over my shoulder. It's important to know where your equipment is, how you've got it secured to your body, and what equipment you're using to protect it. That is the biggest thing, in my opinion there. Let's see here. Will there be a bundle with the G9 Mark II and the Leica 50 to 200? Bundles and stuff like that are dependent on region. It is whatever your region's sales company really kind of wants to use. So, let's see here. Central. You're new to Lumix. Are there Lumix APS-C cameras? No, there aren't. We do not plan and have stated that we have no intention to make APS-C Lumix cameras. We have the Micro Four Thirds, which is our crop censored cameras, and we have the L mount, which is our full frame cameras, and they go hand in hand depending on what you want to do with the camera, what your kind of goal is, what your stylistic choices are. That's where the two systems sit. S5 Mark II and Mark IIX being the newest in the full frame lineup that carry our phase hybrid autofocusing, and then now the G9 Mark II, which is our newest in the Micro Four Thirds realm that also carries phase hybrid autofocus. So yeah, you've got a lot of very different options available. But yeah. Let's see here. All right, we are after 2 o'clock. Let me just run through, do one last quick check, make sure I got through the questions that had been asked before. Ulrich, I did want to get to your last question here because I had seen it and just didn't get a chance to get around to it the other day. The question was, I saw a video where someone complained about only 5 custom modes available. Is it possible to set C3 to 10 different custom modes and the default is still 3? Is there any benefit to having less than 10? So on the G9 Mark II, if anyone's wanted to use the C1, C2, C3 options here, you have more than just what is displayed on the camera. So on the G9 Mark II, we have C1, C2, and C3 labeled on the actual dial. Part of that is kind of just space, making sure that, you have room for all the other, mode dials that are up there. But when you go to C3, you have additional options here. I can change this camera to have up to 10 different custom modes that I can program into this camera. Titles, this is where I can show you what you would be looking at. C1 and C2 are the hard C1 and C2 on the mode dial. C3 on the mode dial is kind of a hybrid option here, in that it is, unless you change it, it is set to C3, which is just the hard mode dial that's on there. But if you enable up to 10, your C3 becomes 3-1 through 3-10. The way you access those is if I turn this camera to C3, turn the display back on. Yep. Get my display back. Oh, it would help if I'm in the right settings here. Hooray! I just completely changed up my HDMI output on this camera. Or my switcher is not having fun. Anyway, your C1 through C3 options here will give you the ability to... I know why it's not working. Let me go C3. Let's go turn HDMI info on. There we go. Now you can see what I'm doing. So when you put the camera into C3 on the menu, you'll get this option here. So this is where you'll have all the way up to C3-10. So you have 2 pages. In the settings, you can rename each of these for whatever profile it is that you have set in there. If it's, say, like 4K 60, 4K 120, 5.8K open gate, so on and so forth. You can rename each of these by going into the settings menu, going down into the setting cog menu here, custom mode settings, and then edit titles. So just like we can rename our built-in color profiles, you can rename these custom settings options and get the setup that works best for you. All right. So, make sure, did I miss any other questions here? Looks like it's pretty good. Well, all right. Thank you so much, everybody. This was a very fast hour for the stream. I just want to update everybody and let you know that next Thursday's live stream is actually going to be a pre-recorded broadcast. I am actually taking a vacation, finally. So that one will be recorded. If you have questions or topics that you want to, have me try to add into it, let me know down in the comments below after this video, and I will try to incorporate them. If not, when we come back live again in October, which will be, wow, it's already October. October 5th will be the return back to live. We will actually be having some guests come on throughout the month of October. We will be talking with those that have had hands-on with the G9 Mark II out in the field, so that you can ask questions to myself, to them, to get their opinions, their thoughts on this camera in the real world. So yeah, I encourage you to subscribe, hit the like button, follow us, get yourself on our email lists, all that kind of stuff. Follow us on social so you know when we're back live. But outside of that, like I said, next week will be pre-recorded. Yeah, I will really be looking forward to see everybody when I come back. Other than that, hope you all have an awesome rest of your day. Have a great weekend. Get out there, create some cool stuff, and yeah, take care. Have an awesome day.